I have worked the oncology floor at Hartfield Regional for 22 years, and I have seen every way a person can leave this world. I have held hands and I have stepped back. I have learned when to speak, and harder, when to stop. What I have never learned, what none of us learn, no matter how long we work these corridors, is what to do when the medicine runs out and the silence moves in. That Tuesday in November, a young nurse named Petra Sokolov taught me something I had no right to expect, and I have not stopped thinking about it since. Professor Maren Voss came to us in late October. She had the bearing of someone who had spent 40 years at a lectern, silver-haired, precise in her speech, the kind of woman who corrected the junior doctors on their prepositions and meant it kindly. Her file said retired professor of English literature, a long career at a university none of us could quite place. Her diagnosis was blunt: late-stage ovarian cancer, complications advancing. She had declined further intervention. She was, as she put it to me on her second morning, editing the final paragraph. She was not an easy patient. She had opinions about the ward's noise levels, about the particular shade of green on the ceiling tiles, about the way the television in the family lounge broadcast its indignities at all hours. She softened. Sometimes in the evenings, I would catch her watching the window, the light going out of the November sky, hands folded on the blanket with a scholar's patience. But she did not invite conversation, and most of the staff gave her room. Petra Sokolov had joined our floor 3 months earlier, a transfer from surgical. She was quiet in the way that some young nurses are quiet. Not shy, exactly, but contained, as though she was saving something. She did her work without fuss. The patients liked her because she listened without needing to fill every pause, which is rarer than it sounds. I had noticed her, the way a senior nurse notices a junior one who is going to be fine, but I knew very little about her beyond her rota, and the fact that she took her lunch breaks in the small hospital chapel at the end of the east corridor rather than the canteen. The Tuesday I am telling you about, Professor Voss had a bad morning. The night team had noted a decline, and by 9 o'clock it was clear we were in the last stretch. Her breathing had changed. She was still conscious, barely, then fully, in the way of those final hours. And when Petra went in to check on her just before 11, she said the professor spoke to her. I was in the corridor. I did not hear it. Petra came out a few minutes later, and she stood in the hallway for a moment with an expression I could not read. I asked her how she was. She looked at me, really looked at me, the way people do when they are deciding something, and said she asked for music. She said she wanted something that sounded like the end of a long sentence. I opened my mouth. I was going to say what I always say, which is that I would see what we could find on the family lounge tablet, some classical channel, something unobtrusive. I had said it before. It always felt inadequate. Before I could speak, Petra said, "I'll be back in 10 minutes," and she walked down the east corridor toward the chapel. I stood outside room 14 and I did not know what she was doing. The chapel at Hartfield is a small room, a dozen pews, a window of plain amber glass, a donated upright piano that the chaplain uses on Sunday mornings for the handful who attend. It is perhaps 40 meters from the oncology ward, separated by a fire door that is usually held a few inches open for ventilation. I had walked past that piano 200 times without giving it a second thought. The first note reached me before I understood what I was hearing. It came through the fire door like something remembered rather than played. A single note, low and questioning, and then a phrase following it, slow as a man choosing his words carefully. Schubert. I recognized it only later when I looked it up. The impromptu in B-flat major, the second of the four that make up his opus 142. But I did not need to name it to feel it. The music moved the way grief moves, when it has been lived with long enough to become something other than pain, deliberate, unhurried. Each phrase resolved before the next was begun. I did not move. Down the corridor, Dr. Ambrose Fell was writing notes at the station. He stopped writing. He did not look up. He simply stopped. The junior nurse, a young man named Crispin who was 3 weeks into his first rotation, came out of the supply room with his arms full of folded linen and stood in the corridor, holding it, listening. A woman from the family lounge, I think she was the daughter of the patient in room 11, appeared in the doorway of that room and leaned against the frame. No one said anything. No one looked at anyone else. We were each of us, separately, inside the same thing. I pushed open the door to room 14, very quietly, and I stood at the threshold. Professor Voss was on her back, her eyes half closed. Breathing had been shallow and effortful all morning. But as the music came down the corridor and into the room, something in her face changed. Not dramatically. This is not that kind of story. It was the small thing. The line between her brows. That scholar's furrow she had worn since the first morning eased. Her left hand, which had been pressed flat and tense against the blanket, opened. Not all the way, just a few degrees, the way a hand opens in sleep. She turned her head a fraction toward the door, toward the sound. Put my hand on the doorframe to keep myself steady. Petra played for perhaps 12 minutes. I say perhaps because time does something strange under music like that, especially in a place like ours, where time is usually the enemy. She moved through the Schubert with a patience and authority that had no right to come from someone who had been moving linen and updating charts. 40 minutes before, there was nothing showy in it. No demonstration of what she could do. It was offered simply in the direction it was needed. The middle section, when the left hand takes the melody and the right answers it like a second voice in conversation. I have heard it since on recordings and it does not sound the same. Nothing recorded ever sounds the same as music played for a specific person in a specific corridor on a Tuesday morning when someone is dying. She did not stop at the end of the Schubert. There was a pause. 4, 5 seconds. And then something that was not any piece I know. A slow, searching melody in the treble, very simple. The kind of thing you feel you have always known even the first time you hear it. The harmony beneath it shifted in ways I could not have predicted, moving through what I can only describe as rooms. Each chord opening a door into the next. No hurry, no destination announced. It was her own, I realized. She was composing it as she played, and she was composing it for Maren Voss, and it sounded exactly like the end of a long sentence. When the last note faded, no one in that corridor moved for a long moment. Then Crispin, who was still standing with his armful of linen, set it down on the floor very carefully, as though he was afraid to make a sound. Dr. Fell put his pen down on the station desk. The woman from room 11's doorway had both hands pressed to her mouth. Petra came back through the fire door and into the corridor. She looked at us, at all of us standing there suspended, with a kind of startled concerns, as though she had not expected an audience, as though it had not occurred to her that the music would carry. I did not know what to say to her. I have worked this floor for 22 years, and I am not without words. I told her she had done something extraordinary. She looked at her shoes and said the professor had asked for something, and she had only tried to give her what she asked for. Professor Voss died at 2:20 that afternoon, quietly, with Petra in the room. I have thought about what to call what Petra did that morning, and I have not found a better word than generosity. Not courage, though it was that. Not talent, though Lord knows it was that too. Generosity, the act of giving something that costs you, to someone who needed it, without stopping to consider whether you were the right person to give it. She was 28 years old, and she worked on an oncology floor, and she had a gift she had kept in chapel 40 meters from a corridor full of people who could have used it. And on the morning it was needed, she simply walked down there and gave it away. I have seen every way a person can leave this world. What I had not seen, not in 22 years, was the right music played at the right moment by the right pair of hands, and the way it can make a whole ward, full of people worn through by difficult work in difficult rooms, stand still in a corridor and remember briefly and completely why any of it matters. I think about Petra at the piano in that small chapel, playing Schubert and then playing something entirely her own, and I think about Maren Voss with her hand open on the blanket. I have not found a finer thing to carry.